Ever feel like you're just drowning in information? Just so much noise coming at you all the time.
Oh, definitely. Information overload is real.
Yeah, and you just want the real signal.
Yeah.
That's kind of our mission here at the Deep Dive, really giving you that shortcut to understanding what actually matters.
Cutting through the noise.
Exactly. And today, we're taking a deep dive into something that, well, it shapes pretty much everything around us. Values.
A world of values, yeah. Often unexamined.
Totally. So what are they, really? How do they influence our decisions, our thoughts, even our society? We've got some fascinating sources lined up.
Yeah, some potentially unexpected insights in there, too.
Right. Should be interesting to see why understanding values is maybe more critical now than ever. So let's get started.
Let's do it.
Okay. So when we talk about values, it can feel a bit abstract, can it? Like something you'd discuss in a philosophy class.
It can seem that way, yeah.
But our sources point to a definition from a social psychologist, Milton Rokeach. He called values an enduring belief. Simple words, but...
But packed with meaning. What does enduring really mean here?
Exactly. What makes a belief genuinely enduring when everything else seems to change so fast?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. It's not just a strong opinion you hold for a bit. Think about, say, finance, a capital asset, right? It gives you long-lasting benefit.
Okay, like a building or equipment.
Yeah, something with staying power. An enduring belief, a true value, it's like that for your character. It provides this long-lasting substance. It's not flimsy.
So it's the bedrock.
Pretty much. And that enduring quality, that's what gives values their real power. They give you the resilience, the conviction to stay true to yourself.
Even when things are tough.
Especially when things are tough. That inner strength helps you make the right choices, even when they're incredibly hard choices. It's having the guts to act on what you believe, you know?
That makes sense. Not just belief, but enduring belief that gives resilience. It makes me think of values as like a compass.
A compass is a good analogy.
Yeah, our sources really hammer home this idea that values provide direction to life.
Yeah.
They break it down into four things. A purposeful life, a truthful life, having ideals, and a clear vision.
Those four elements are crucial.
But how hard is it, realistically, to maintain that direction today?
Oh, it's incredibly challenging. And it makes you think of Socrates, doesn't it? An unexamined life is not worth living.
Right, the classic quote.
Well, an unexamined life is directionless, isn't it? It lacks purpose because you haven't really thought about it. It's maybe not truthful because your actions don't line up with your core belief.
No ideals driving it.
Exactly. No clear ideals, no real vision for where you're headed. Values give you that internal framework. They stop you from just drifting.
Okay, so we've kind of defined values, talked about direction, but what about the flip side? What happens when that compass is broken? Or, values are just missing?
The consequences, that's critical.
What do our sources say about the real-world impact for us as individuals, and maybe for society too?
Well, Mahatma Gandhi had some profound thoughts on this with his 7 sins. He basically argued that a lack of values makes certain things worthless, even dangerous.
Worthless? Like what?
Things like wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality.
Wow, okay. Strong stuff.
Science without humanity, religion without sacrifice, and politics without principles. Without that value foundation, these big parts of life just crumble or become harmful.
And it's not just individual, is it? When values are missing in, say, public service, what happens then? Any sort of startling examples?
Oh, absolutely. Societally, you see the direct fallout. Corruption, nepotism, which is basically favoritism towards family or friends, a specific kind.
Right, giving jobs to relatives.
Exactly. And this leads to massive inequalities, injustice, even things like climate injustice, where the impacts hit vulnerable people the hardest. It eats away at what you might call social consciousness.
Social consciousness, like a collective moral compass.
Yeah, something that historical movements like the Bhakti movement in India tried to reawaken. A lack of values just erodes that collective sense of right and wrong.
And in public service itself. The sources mention some really shocking examples of corruption.
Yeah, unbelievable stuff sometimes. Like a school principal literally caught stealing eggs meant for kids' meals.
No way.
Yes. Or the issue with MNREGA job cards, that's the rural employment scheme in India. Cards getting deleted for tiny name mismatches, leaving people jobless.
Just like that. Wow.
And maybe the worst. A clerk just delaying paperwork, keeping a woman stuck in a correction home longer than she should have been. It shows this rigid adherence to rules over actual human service.
That's awful. It speaks to that lack of responsiveness you mentioned.
Directly. Civil servants may be sticking to the absolute letter of the law, not the spirit or the intent behind it. Instead of finding ways to help within the rules, they become obstacles.
And that just kills public trust, doesn't it? Makes services ineffective.
Completely. Low trust, poor services. It all links back.
It really reminds you of what Chanakya, the old Indian philosopher, said about power without values. Still relevant.
Absolutely. A timeless warning.
Okay, so thinking about all this, the power of values, the problems, when they're absent, it makes you wonder, are they fixed? Like set in stone? Or do they change?
That's a fantastic question. Are they static or dynamic?
Yeah. What do the sources suggest?
Well, the consensus is they're definitely dynamic. They shift. They're influenced by culture, by individual consciousness, by beliefs, all things that evolve.
Okay, how do we see that happening? Any examples?
Oh, loads. Think about generational gaps, views on, say, gender equality. Hugely different between grandparents and grandkids. Often, what was normal then isn't now.
True. Very true.
Or societal differences. Some cultures might lean more towards individualism, maybe shorter-term thinking. You sometimes see that debated in Western contexts, like around trade deals.
Right, versus...
Versus other societies, perhaps more common in Asia, that emphasize communitarianism, thinking long-term, group harmony. Those are fundamentally different value orientations.
So values differ across cultures and across time.
And even within cultures, over time. Think about religious norms shaping laws. Gambling or alcohol, totally fine in one place, completely illegal next door, based on prevailing values often rooted in religion.
Makes sense.
Even something like freedom of speech. Its boundaries are constantly being debated, aren't they? What's acceptable? Public discourse changes. Think about all the recent fuss over streaming content, OTT platforms.
Yeah, where's the line between creative freedom and responsibility?
Exactly. It shows values aren't fixed points. They're constantly being renegotiated, which poses a real challenge, How do we keep our footing when the ground itself is shifting?
That is the challenge, navigating that shifting landscape. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. How do some of these maybe timeless values actually show up today in our modern lives?
The practical application. Good question.
Yeah, what are some key values that are surprisingly relevant right now?
Well, okay, let's take patience. We think of it as just, waiting in line, but it's deeper. Remember that story about the Chinese bamboo? I think Rahul Dravid, the cricketer, mentioned it. This bamboo, it barely grows for years, like 5 years sometimes.
Right, it seems like nothing's happening.
Exactly. But underground, it's building this massive root system. Then, bam, it shoots up incredibly fast, like 90 feet in weeks. It needed that patient foundational work.
I see. So patience for building strength, not just waiting.
Precisely. Foundational strength takes time, whether it's personal growth or fixing big societal problems. You need that patience.
Where else?
How about concentration? Feels like that's a value under attack today, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. With social media, phones.
Totally. This attention deficit syndrome people talk about. I mean, I struggle with it too sometimes. Constantly checking things. It really hits our ability to focus deeply.
Definitely affects work, relationships, everything.
Then there's interdependence. Think of a spectrum. Dependent, independent, interdependent, overdependent. Well, being totally independent isn't always best for complex problems. Neither is being overdependent. That sweet spot is interdependence, recognizing we need each other, cooperating.
Like teamwork, but bigger.
Kind of. Like in public service, initiatives like Mission Aram in India try to get different departments working together, not in silos. That's interdependence in action.
Yeah.
It's essential for tackling complex, modern challenges.
Interesting. Any others?
How about generosity? Not just giving money, but giving credit where it's due.
Acknowledging others' contributions.
Yeah. Some leaders, maybe like Donald Trump was sometimes accused of, tend to take all the credit for team efforts, right? Real generosity shares the spotlight.
Good point. And friendship.
Friendship, even between nations. It's a value. It's like when India helps Turkey after an earthquake, there's an underlying value of friendship, an expectation it builds goodwill. Not that it's just forgotten. It's about reciprocity.
That leads to a related point, doesn't it? What about scientific values? Especially with all the new tech AI, deep fakes, GM crops, designer baby.
Few ethical questions there.
Yeah. How do values guide us or fail to guide us with these? What do the sources say?
Well, take deepfakes. They're a prime example of potential science without humanity or commerce without morality, like Gandhi warned.
How so?
Because the technology can be used for, say, creating viral misinformation or political attacks without much thought for the means, like truth or the harm caused.
Right. The ends justifying the means.
Exactly. And with GM crops or designer babies, the ethical questions are about, are we playing God? What about equity? Who gets access to these enhancements? Do we really understand the long-term consequences?
It all comes back to that potential clash between scientific progress and fundamental human values.
It does. It highlights that constant tension. Ends versus means. Science needs that moral compass.
So given everything we've talked about, the power of values,
Yeah.
what happens when they're missing, how they change, how they apply to modern tech, what does this all mean for us? How do we actually cultivate these values?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do we foster them? This is where value education comes in.
Okay, what exactly is value education? Is it just teaching kids to be nice?
Well, it's more than that. It's about genuinely instilling concern for others, for society, for the nation, even for people you don't know. There's that saying, right? Education devoid of values creates a clever devil.
A clever devil. I like that. Scary, but memorable.
It means you can train someone's intellect, their IQ, make them really smart. But if you don't also train the heart and soul, the emotions, the sense of purpose, you risk creating someone harmful.
So it's head, heart, and soul.
Exactly. And that's how you get wisdom. It's not just knowing stuff. I think of it like an equation almost. Wisdom, knowledge plus values. You need both. Without values guiding how you use knowledge, you can't reach true wisdom.
That resonates. It reminds me of Aurobindo Ghosh, the Indian philosopher. He said something about an unpurified heart confusing understanding.
Precisely. And Winston Churchill had similar thoughts about universities. They shouldn't just teach technical skills, but build wisdom and character.
Are we actually doing this now? Are there modern efforts focusing on value education?
Yes, definitely. Look at the National Education Policy 2020 in India, for instance. It specifically talks about integrating value education across the board.
How does it plan to do that?
It focuses on developing not just the cognitive side, but also the emotional and behavioral parts that they call the CAB model. Cognitive, affective, behavioral. It's about fostering social skills, emotional intelligence.
So whole person development.
Right, and including value education and teacher training, encouraging community service like Shramdan, voluntary work, and trying to instill pride in positive Indian values and traditions. It's about finding that balance between past wisdom and future needs.
And are there other things happening too?
Sure. Things like the adult tinkering labs, they focus on creativity and innovation, which have value dimensions. Or campaigns like Padna Likhna Abhiyan, the adult literacy program, which also promotes things like gender equality and respecting diversity. It shows an ongoing effort.
It's good to hear it's being actively considered.
And when we talk about cultivating values, thinking about moral development is useful. Kohlberg's stages.
Oh yeah, I remember those from psychology. Remind me.
Well, it's a progression. Stage 1 is basically avoiding punishment, like a kid going to school, just so they don't get told off.
Okay, the stick approach.
Right. Then it moves through stages like seeking rewards, wanting approval, following rules, all the way up to the highest stage, stage 6.
Okay.
That's conscience or value-driven. At that point, you do the right thing because your internal moral compass tells you to, not because of rewards or punishments, just because it aligns with your core values. That's the goal, really.
Acting from conscience, needing no external push. That makes sense. This brings us to a really pressing issue today: mental health. Specifically, mental health at work.
A huge challenge, and definitely one with ethical dimensions.
How do values, or maybe the lack of them, factor into workplace mental health issues? What do our sources suggest?
Well, you can see the links pretty clearly. Poor work culture is a big one. It can lead to what's called labor value alienation, where people feel disconnected, like just a cog.
Dehumanized.
Yeah, exactly. Then there's that commerce without morality. Again, organizations prioritizing profit above all else, treating people as means to an end, not ends in themselves.
Pushing people too hard for the bottom line.
Right. Organizational goals overriding individual well-being. Add to that societal pressures, materialism, maybe feeling you have to earn more, work longer.
And the internet. Does that play a role?
It can, paradoxically. While it connects us, it can also displace older values around community, face-to-face support, leading to isolation or constant comparison, which impacts mental health.
So a complex mix of factors. What about ethical solutions? How can values help address this?
Solutions often involve bringing values back into focus. Things like mindfulness, drawing from traditions like Buddhism, can help individuals cope. Value education from a young age builds a foundation.
And for organizations.
They need clear, strict codes of ethics and conduct. They need to be upfront about expectations like a citizen's charter does for public services. Reducing stigma around mental health is crucial.
And basic human decency.
Absolutely. Applying principles like empathy, sympathy, compassion, using frameworks like care ethics, which really emphasizes relationships and responding to needs. It's about treating people humanely.
What a journey we've been on today, really digging deep into values.
From defining them to seeing them in action or inaction.
Yeah, starting with that simple idea, enduring belief, and seeing how it connects to character, to resilience, to societal issues like corruption or even climate injustice.
And how they're not static, how they evolve with culture and time.
Right, that dynamic nature. And then applying them to really modern problems, deepfakes, workplace stress. And finally, thinking about how we cultivate them through value education.
It shows they really are the backbone, aren't they, for individuals and for society?
Absolutely. A well-lived life, a well-functioning society. It seems to hinge on these underlying values.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Just consider, as you go through your day, how even the small choices you make reflect your values.
The seemingly insignificant ones.
Yeah, and thinking about that, how might understanding your own values more deeply not just shape your path, but maybe even add to our collective wisdom?
That's a great takeaway. We definitely encourage you, our listeners, to continue your own deep dive. Maybe reflect on which values really speak to you and how you could consciously bring them more into your life.
A worthwhile reflection.
Indeed. Thank you so much for joining us on The Deep Dive.